Okay, I'm going to be refuting the claim that hydraulic fracturing has a negative effect on the environment. First, I'm going to address their claim that hydraulic fracturing releases harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Then I'm going to focus on their claim that fracking causes toxins in the water supply. And then I'm going to address their evidence that is used to prove that fracking is dangerous. So back to the first claim that hydraulic fracturing releases harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It may release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but it does so at much lower concentrations than other energy production, such as agriculture, energy production, and landfill management. According to the EPA, 95% of methane, which is a greenhouse gas, is released into the atmosphere as a result of agriculture. Methane is an animal byproduct, so since we have a large agriculture production in the United States, that's where most of the methane is released from. The other 4%, or another 4% of methane that's released into the atmosphere is due to landfill methane. As everything goes into the landfill, it decomposes and releases methane. Fracking accounts for less than 1% of the methane released into the atmosphere. And according to the EPA, the top producers of greenhouse gases, including methane, are energy supply, large industries, land use or forestry, agriculture, transportation, and waste or wastewater. Fracking doesn't account for the top greenhouse gases in any of these productions either. So now the second claim, which is fracking causes toxins in the water supply. According to the EPA as well, they cite that the main contributors to wastewater toxicity is fossil fuels, plastics, and synthetic textiles. And those are all urban productions. Fracking is mainly a rural production. In the scientific paper from the journal Science, the paper is titled Urban Contribution of Pharmaceuticals and Other Organic Wastewater Contaminants to Streams During Differing Flow Conditions. The authors state that previous research has shown that municipal wastewater is a contributing source of OWCs, which is organic wastewater contaminants, to the environment. They also go on to state that wastewater runoff in urban areas is one of the biggest contributors to wastewater toxicity. And they looked at fracking and found that fracking does contribute to wastewater toxicity, but it's at much lower volumes and much lower concentrations and more prominent energy production mechanisms that are more common and seen in urban areas. The last claim I'm going to talk about is the claim that fracking can be dangerous, and I'm going to refute this by talking about their evidence. They cite from a paper that looks at a couple whose house was blown up, probably due to fracking, the gas leaked into the house. The source is from a local newspaper, and it cites a quote from a neighbor, McGee. The quote is, "We still have 100% gas reading level every time they test." First of all, we don't really know who the neighbor is. It just is a neighbor, so we don't know her credibility. We don't really know if she knows anything about fracking or who she really is. And also, when it says we still have 100% gas reading, we don't know where that gas reading is coming from. It could be off of a propane meter, off of a pool. It doesn't really say anything, so we don't know what that gas reading means. So it's not really a conclusive evidence. We don't know if there's any accuracy to that statement. The journal that the paper was also run in is run by the Journal Registry Company, which is it's a large company that produces about 3,000 newspapers in the northeastern United States. And the company is really notably run by liberals, so liberals typically don't favor fracking because they're proponents for the environment, so there could be some bias to that journal as well and to that piece of evidence. So overall, hydraulic fracturing is not as detrimental to the environment as more common production techniques.
All the structural stuff is fine. You seem to have it laid out and easy for us to follow. On the first point, I think that you do a good job minimizing the significance of fracking. You've got some statistical information here that indicates that it's a relatively small contributor to the total amount of methane in the atmosphere, and I thought that that was a good way of putting it into context. You can't deny that methane gets released, but you can point out that the amount that comes from fracking is minimal in comparison, and the idea that it presents some huge risk to the environment ignores the reality that it is a really teeny percentage of the total methane sources for that particular problem. So I thought that that was a pretty solid point. On the second point on the EPA, basically you're making the same kind of argument. There's not really a discussion of the advocates' evidence on either of these points. It's mostly, you're kind of accepting the premise that there is methane and that toxins do get released, but your argument is that they're relatively minor and that there are other things that are so much more significant that worrying about this seems to be inappropriate or unimportant. And again, I think that that's a reasonable approach to take on this. Especially, this is a place where I think you need to challenge the advocates' evidence on a couple of things. For example, is there any demonstration that the release of toxins as a result of fracking has made a water supply untenable, or that anybody has in fact been poisoned or hurt as a result of releases due to fracking? The absence of evidence on that particular point makes your argument diminishing this seem more significant and meaningful, and I think that because you don't really engage the advocates' evidence on this point, that's a little bit problematic. The third point, you're kind of focusing on this one report about the house exploding, and I think you've got some reasonable presses on this. I don't know that I would go so far as to accept the notion that the registry, the Journal Registry, is a liberal newspaper. That seems like a real stretch to get some conclusion there. The notion that all we're getting is a local report by a neighbor on this particular issue, I think that indicates that there's no authority that has evaluated this and said that it's a fracking-related issue. That we don't know what the gas levels being so high comes from. Again, because there's an absence of an official report on this. I think that's the argument that works best here. I don't remember if the advocates' evidence really talked about this in the context of an official document or a court ruling. If there was, then I think you definitely need to adjust a little bit. If that's the only evidence that it's had, though, is it's this neighbor's report, I think you've got reasonable presses on that, except for, like I said, that last point, which sounds like it's some talking point that a website came up with, but I'm not sure that it's very convincing. All right, thank you.